Okay, let me just, where's my Zoom? Okay, share screen. Should be this one. Share. Okay, you see the screen?
Yep, very good.
Human evolution. We'll back on human evolution again, because then we'll start working through our history. So we'll start with a video again, and then we'll discuss that video a little bit later on. The video lasts about 30 minutes. Oh, let me go there. Yeah, play.
As revolutionary and controversial as the origin of species was, the obvious topic it did not cover is the evolution of humans. All Darwin offered there was a vague note that, eventually, light would be thrown on the origin of man and his history. At the time of its publication, in 1859, there was virtually no fossil evidence for human evolution. Yet Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection suggested that all species could be understood in terms of descent with modification. The logical conclusion was that humans too evolved from ancestors different from current-day humans. The first person to make this point, at least in print, was Thomas Henry Huxley, known as Darwin's bulldog for his fierce advocacy and defense of evolution through natural selection. Huxley's 1863 book, Evidence as to Man's Place in Nature, pointed out the anatomical similarities between humans and great apes like gorillas, chimpanzees, and orangutans. Like humans, apes have forward-facing eyes, large brains for the size of our bodies, and lack tails. The structure of our feet and hands are very similar, too, including fingernails instead of claws. To Huxley, these similarities suggest common ancestry between humans and great apes. But despite the similarities, it was clear that humans are different from gorillas and chimpanzees in important ways. For one thing, humans walk upright on two legs. While chimps can walk upright for short distances, which they sometimes do when their hands are full, they aren't very good at it. Their hips won't allow them to balance on one foot, so they have to lean from side to side with each step, making their motion less efficient. What's more, their backbones, pelvis and knees all are not well suited for upright walking. Another difference is body hair. Even the hairiest humans have much less body hair than chimpanzees and gorillas. And, of course, there is the human brain. While apes have larger brains than most mammals, the human brain is exceptionally large for our body size. Compared to the brain of a chimpanzee or gorilla, the human brain is 3 times larger. And along with the difference in brain size comes dramatic differences in the cognitive abilities of humans and chimpanzees, including the ability to make and use complex tools and the ability to communicate through symbolic language. Despite these differences, Huxley argued that humans must have once shared a common ancestor with the great apes. Yet, at the time, there was very little physical evidence for intermediate stages between humans and a chimpanzee-like ancestor. One possible clue that Huxley discussed came from the fragment of a skull and a few limb bones found in a mine in the Neander Valley near Düsseldorf, Germany. Although these would later be described as belonging to our close relatives, the Neanderthals, or Homo neanderthalensis. Their age and importance was not apparent when they were first described in 1857. Besides, the Neanderthal bones appeared much more human-like than ape-like. Darwin expanded on Huxley's ideas about human evolution in his 1871 book The Descent of Man. Like Huxley, Darwin saw the similarities between humans and apes as evidence for their close evolutionary relationships. As additional evidence, Darwin pointed to early stages in development in which a human fetus has structures that are found in other animals, like a tail. Darwin also acknowledged that the lack of a fossil record linking humans to apes was problematic, but speculated that fossils of human ancestors would eventually be found. He even predicted that such fossils would likely come from Africa, where great ape diversity is highest. Darwin was right. Many fossil remains of human ancestors have since been discovered. He was also correct in his prediction that the oldest human fossils would be found in Africa. But what Darwin did not know was just how many different types of human-like species, or hominins, once existed. These discoveries, as well as insights gained from sequencing DNA from ancient remains, have led evolutionary biologists to leave behind the old, iconic image of human evolution, popularized by Huxley, of a linear progression from hunched ape to upright human. In its place, we now have enough information to draw a phylogeny, or evolutionary tree, for humans and our closest living and extinct relatives. This depiction of human evolution resembles what Darwin would have wanted, with many splits, each leading to a series of branches that represent the different species of hominins. We can think of each branch as a natural experiment in how to make a human. The use of DNA sequence data has provided a powerful new way to compare the genomes of humans and great apes, and thereby reconstruct our own evolutionary tree. Our closest living relatives are chimpanzees. Next closest are gorillas and then orangutans. While the last common ancestor of all four lived around 10 million years ago, we shared a common ancestor with chimpanzees until as recently as 5 to 7 million years ago. Around that time there was a speciation event that gave rise to two lineages. One would lead to chimpanzees, the other would be the hominins, some of whom eventually become humans. We don't know all of the characteristics of our last common ancestor with chimpanzees. As for hominins, the first thing to notice is that there wasn't a simple transition from one species of hominin to another, leading ultimately to Homo sapiens. Rather, the fossil evidence shows that many hominin species were alive at the same time. We don't yet know the exact relationships between each of the species, meaning that we can't trace a line of direct descent from the common ancestor we shared with chimpanzees directly to us. And yet somewhere on this tree, a transition occurred that separates animal from human. That's part of what makes the evolutionary tree of hominins, is one of the most profound images in all of science. Think about it. Can we draw a line and say that on one side are non-humans and on the other side are humans? Where would the line be? Did we become human when we started walking upright? Or when we developed language or art or religion? Was it the ability to harness fire? Or was it the ability to make complex tools that made us human? The other thing that blows my mind and I like to imagine would have blown Darwin's too is how just many species of hominin have existed. There were somewhere around 15, depending on what source you consider and which species definition you favor. The fact that many of these species were alive at the same time and the same place, or at least nearby, means that many of these species likely interacted. What it would have been like to live in a world with multiple human or human-like species. What would we think of them? As allies or foes? Or maybe both? In most animal species, especially most primates, an encounter with a different species is usually dangerous. Chimpanzees are known to hunt and eat monkeys. And for example, when a wolf encounters a coyote, the coyote often becomes lunch. On the other hand, the occurrence of hybrids between closely distinct but related species sometimes can result successful reproduction. Like ligers, the hybrid offspring of a lion and a tiger. What caused there to be so many different human species? All of the forces of evolution, mutation, natural and sexual selection, gene flow, and genetic drift led to repeated episodes of speciation. Each species had a different ecological niche, with its own advantages and disadvantages given its environment. And yet, out of all this diversity, only one species, Homo sapiens, would survive. If we think of these different types of humans as natural experiments in human evolution, then what can we learn from the outcome of these experiments? Why were we the species that survived and not another? Why not many others? To understand why, let's take a deeper look at what we've learned about hominins since Darwin's lifetime. One of the oldest members of the hominin family is Artipithicus Ramidus, which lived about 4.4 million years ago. The fossilized remains of a skull and parts of the lower body were first discovered in Ethiopia during the early 1990s by Tim White and his colleagues. Since then, more than 100 additional specimens of this species have been discovered. The overall appearance of Artipithicus Ramidus is more chimp-like than human-like. Its skull shows that it had a relatively small brain, about the same size as a chimpanzee. But the shape of its pelvis suggests that it had begun to walk upright at least some of the time, although not as effectively as modern humans. One of the most famous fossil hominins was discovered by Donald Johanson and his colleagues in Hadar, Ethiopia, on November 24, 1974. The team celebrated that evening at their field site by dancing to the Beatles' song, "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds." The song prompted the team to nickname the fossil, Lucy. Lucy belonged to the species Australopithecus afarensis. Johanson and his team uncovered parts of the skull and much of the body as well, which helped resolve a long-standing debate about whether walking on 2 feet evolved before or after our big brains. Lucy had a skull about the same size as a chimpanzee, but her pelvis, backbone, knee, and foot clearly showed that she was capable of walking upright in much the same way as modern humans. A later discovery in Tanzania of preserved footprints helped confirm that Australopithecus afarensis walked on 2 feet. The position of the toes in front of the foot, the short length of the toes, and the presence of an arch all indicate a foot that resembled ours more than that of a chimpanzee. While the discovery of Lucy and others of her species made it clear that walking upright evolved before the evolution of a larger brain, the question of why our ancestors began walking upright still remained. Biologist Dan Lieberman thinks the answer may have to do with another peculiarity of humans: our sweat. Compared with chimpanzees and other apes, humans have far more sweat glands distributed over our bodies. But what does this have to do with walking upright? Sweat helps the body cool down, especially during intense activity like running. Humans are not very fast in a sprint, but we are able to keep running at modest speeds for much longer than most mammals, thanks in part to our ability to cool down by sweating. Lieberman's research suggests a method called persistence hunting, which is used by some modern indigenous peoples, may have been used by early hominins as well. Persistence hunting works like this. If you run towards an animal, like an antelope, it will of course run away. An antelope is faster in a sprint than any human, but it will eventually stop running. It has to because it must cool down by panting, which it can't do while galloping. If a person can keep up with the antelope enough to keep it from stopping for long to cool down, the antelope will eventually overheat and collapse. At that point, it becomes an easy target for a club or a spear. By 2 million years ago, hominins had evolved to be fully bipedal, meaning they walked and ran on 2 feet just as well as modern humans. But they still had relatively small brains. Consider one of the first members of our genus, Homo erectus. Homo erectus had a body that looked a lot like a modern human. It had a larger brain than Australopithecus, and probably made stone tools, both of which suggest a much greater level of intelligence. Homo erectus is the first member of the human lineage to leave Africa, spreading as far as Southeast Asia. In fact, the first remains of what is now recognized as Homo erectus were discovered by Eugene Dubois on the Indonesian island of Java in 1891. We are still learning how far Homo erectus traveled. But the shocking discovery of Homo Florescences in 2003 on the Indonesian island of Flores suggests that some Homo erectus may have crossed the open ocean. What researchers discovered, just inside the entrance to a cave called Liang Bua, were the remains of perhaps a dozen individuals, including a mostly complete skull. Despite being fully grown adults, they stood only about 3 feet, 6 inches tall, which earned them the nickname hobbits after the characters in Tolkien's novels. Researchers believe that the hobbits are descendants of a small group of Homo erectus that became stranded and evolved island dwarfism, much like the pygmy elephants found on many islands. This discovery was puzzling because radiometric dating of the sediments surrounding the fossil suggested it lived between 100,000 and 60,000 years ago. But the bones had an unexpected combination of features, including a relatively small brain and wrist bones that are more typical of chimpanzees and older hominin species. Hominin evolution involved radiations in all directions, geographic and anatomical, not just a single line. Back in Africa, brain size was slowly increasing until about 800,000 years ago, when it suddenly began to increase rapidly. We can imagine how increased intelligence could have been beneficial, but why did it suddenly happen beginning 800,000 years ago? Interestingly, the rapid brain size increase in hominins coincided with a period of extreme climate fluctuation. It is possible that an unstable climate meant that individuals with larger brains and greater intelligence had a survival advantage. Exactly when and where our species, Homo sapiens, first appeared, is a source of constant debate among experts. A study published in 2017 described fossil skulls and jaw bones from a site in Morocco that date to approximately 315,000 years ago. These authors claimed that these fossils represent the oldest remains found yet of Homo sapiens. But other experts don't agree that the Moroccan material should be considered Homo sapiens, noting the lack of a human chin and an overly prominent forehead. Fossils more widely accepted as Homo sapiens have been found in East Africa, including 196,000-year-old specimens from Ethiopia. Several additional discoveries suggest that our species lived alongside other human species. In 2013, explorers deep inside Rising Star Cave in South Africa discovered a chamber containing fossil bones. They took pictures of the bones and showed them to anthropologists, including Lee Berger. Berger assembled a team of experts to return to the cave in 2013 and 2014, where they found more than 1,500 fossils from at least 15 individuals that Berger and his colleagues described as a new species, Homo Naledi. The Homo Naledi fossils had hands and feet that looked like modern humans, but their skulls and teeth were closer to those of early Homo species, like Homo erectus. The brain was especially small, more like that of Australopithecus. Radiometric dating suggested these semi-human Homo Naledi fossils were between 335,000 and 236,000 years old, suggesting they were around at the same time as our species was coming into existence. While we don't yet know how our species interacted with Homo Naledi, a discovery in another cave more than 6,000 miles away revealed at least one way we interacted with other human species. In 2000, a tooth was found in a cave near the town of Denisova in southern Siberia. Also in the same cave, a piece of finger bone was found in 2008. Because of the cold, dry climate, the bones were well preserved, allowing pieces of intact DNA to be recovered from the bones by ancient DNA expert Svante Pääbo. Initial study of mitochondrial DNA was enough to determine that the bones represented a previously unknown group of humans, and were given the name Denisovans. The mitochondrial DNA sequence showed that Denisovans were distinct from Homo sapiens, and most closely related to Neanderthals. In 2012, Svante Pääbo and his team published the results of a complete genome analysis based on the DNA extracted from the Denisovan fossils. Their study also included a big surprise. By comparing the Denisovan genome with the genome of modern humans, they found that modern humans have Denisovan DNA. Specifically, modern people today who trace their ancestry to regions outside of Africa have as much as 5% Denisovan DNA. Mysteriously, the highest percentages come from New Guinea and the Southwest Pacific Islands. While we don't yet understand the reasons for the geographic distribution of Denisovan ancestry, one thing is clear. As our ancestors spread out of Africa and encountered other human species like Denisovans, they had sex with them. The result of these trysts were babies that were raised, survived to adulthood, and had children of their own. Additional studies by Pääbo's group showed that modern humans also have DNA from European Neanderthals. While we can't know exactly what encounters between these different species of humans were like, including whether the sexual encounters were consensual, the fact that the encounters involved sex suggests a closer relationship than between humans and animals. In other words, we saw these other species as people. The populations of many large mammals shrank some 70,000 years ago. The eruption of the Toba volcano on the Indonesian island of Sumatra sent enough ash into the atmosphere that it likely disrupted the Earth's climate for several years. Humans were among the many casualties, and we nearly became extinct. Comparisons of modern human genomes showed that all humans living today appear to descend from a population bottleneck of only 10,000 individuals that lived about 70,000 years ago. So, humans just barely avoided the sort of extinction vortex that wiped out a lot of other large animals, including all the other humans. We became the lone survivors, the only descendants from a widespread and diverse group unlike anything that had previously existed on Earth. Our closest relatives have all become extinct. But our evolution did not stop with the origin of our species, Homo sapiens. As we spread around the world, our ancestors adapted to new environments. Some of the results of those evolutionary changes can still be seen in people living today. One example is that people from different regions of the world differ in how much of the pigment eumelanin their skin cells produce, resulting in lighter or darker colored skin. If we look at how the intensity of sunlight varies in different parts of the Earth, it matches very well with the average amount of eumelanin people have in those regions. We now understand the distribution of eumelanin in human skin as an adaptation to varying levels of sunlight. Eumelanin acts as a natural sunscreen, so having more of it is advantageous in regions where sunlight is very intense, like in the tropics and at high altitudes where the air is thinner. Ultraviolet light from the sun causes damage to DNA, which is why too much sun exposure can lead to skin cancer. But ultraviolet light also breaks down folate, an important B vitamin that is needed to copy DNA every time a cell divides. A developing fetus is constantly dividing its cells as it grows, so it needs to make a lot of copies of its DNA. Protection from sunlight by eumelanin can help ensure cell division goes smoothly. In other words, having more eumelanin was favored by natural selection in places with intense sunlight. In regions where sunlight is less intense, like Northern Europe, having too much eumelanin can become a liability. That's because exposure to adequate levels of sunlight are needed to make vitamin D, which helps the body absorb calcium. Once again, this is important for a developing fetus that is growing a skeleton built largely of calcium. But we can see evidence for the history of natural selection on skin pigmentation in some of the genes responsible for differences in eumelanin production. One example is a gene called SLC24A5, which is located on chromosome number 15. SLC24A5 shows a strong signal of having been subjected to natural selection, particularly in Europe where skin color evolved to be lighter over the course of several thousand years. So, natural selection favored producing less eumelanin in regions with less intense sunlight, leading to a healthy baby. A variety of human evolutionary experiments were all running and interacting when a catastrophe 70,000 years ago created a bottleneck from which only a small portion of hominins survived. With similar bottlenecks, or even extinctions, for many other large mammals. Ironically, that catastrophe, like the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, may have opened more opportunities for the survivors to use their sharpened abilities and expand as never before.
Okay, so that is the presentation. So we'll cut to the discussion. So now there are a few points I would like to address later on. The first is out of Africa. So I think I will talk about our time frame, how many times human, whatever human, left Africa. The second issue we will have to deal with is the bottleneck that is about 70,000 years ago. The huge volcanic eruption that caused a minor extinction event not too far away, only 70,000 years ago. So, and the third issue is how do we define human? Do we define human by 2 use, or do we define human by having cooked meat or cooked food. So there is a issue which I think needs a lot of discussion. So these three issues I will cover in future presentations. So at the moment, looking at this today's presentation, we notice that human has evolved quite a bit. So any comment? No?
It was interesting where he said that there might be two lots of human or human types in existence at once, both developing separately and not quite the same.
Yeah. Well, obviously,
and the fact that a big event, and also the fact a big event that might have taken out the dinosaurs took out a lot of human people, but the ones left had more chance of food and hunting and making a go of things.
No, definitely, Homo sapiens, that's us, has lived together with the Neanderthals in Europe. So that is quite sure. So at one time, I think that's probably before the volcanic eruption. That is about 70,000 years ago. So before that time, a different species of not necessarily Homo sapien, Homos are living together, but
Homo Erectus, I think.
Homo Erectus, Homo Neanderthals, etc. will be living together.
Okay.
But once that eruption of the volcanoes, then a severe competition between food, obviously, and that kills off the other homos and left us. That's why I think. That's why I want to address this volcanic activity and see how widespread that is in order to fully appreciate how that event might change the course of our history.
Yeah, just a minute. Albert, the dinosaurs left us about 60 million years ago, not 60,000. Yeah. This is a more recent volcano. We never lived with dinosaurs.
Yeah, human never lived with dinosaurs, no.
Whoever
Absolutely not.
But also remember, we keep dating our Australian Aboriginals back. They're back to 60,000. They could go back further. So this volcano, were they here? Are they the first? We have to think.
Yeah, well, probably they have arrived here maybe before the volcano.
Yes, possibly.
Possibly, because, yeah.
You're getting back now. If we find remains 70,000 years ago, it'll be at the time of the Great Volcano.
Yeah, so if we can find something earlier than that's, let's say, 80,000 years ago or 100,000 years ago, then it will be quite sure that Homo sapiens arrived at Australia before the volcano.
Before the volcano, yeah.
Yeah, and then if that's the case, then the origin reproducing pairs in Australia will be quite small. Given globally, the scientists estimate it is about 10,000 surviving reproducing pairs. So if that's spread out, so that will be just a handful, maybe 10 or 20 pairs or even less just in Australia. And then they survive and then eventually reproduce to the Aborigines population here in Australia. It's quite remarkable. That
it is. It's quite. And although more waves of humans came in from the north over the time, but if they were here before that volcano, it's very interesting.
Yeah, and then another interesting is actually human has already spread to the whole world before the volcano, I suppose, because we find, for example, in America. So how can people arrive in America, given the distance? They must have gone through the. There's a lot of speculation how humans arrived in America. America is pretty isolated from Africa.
Yeah.
But you'd think there the Bering Strait frozen over would provide a land bridge from Russia over to Alaska and then down.
Yeah, that is one theory.
That's the theory that I know, that they came via the Bering Strait. And don't forget, there has been global warming beforehand, at various times beforehand, and it is believed that Europe and America were together via what is now the Bering Strait.
The Bering Strait had to go right up to Russia, today's Russia, and then in the eastern part of Russia, and then going through there. So it is a long way.
Yes, but the people in South and North America are related to Chinese people, to Mongoloid people, not to Caucasoid people.
Yeah, so there's another theory saying that the people in Africa, in America, is actually sailed through the Pacific Ocean from the Polynesia, from Indonesia, and then they get on a boat, a sailing raft, and then drift to America. But how that happens, we have to look at the monsoon, look at how the winds, and is that possible? Given at that time there will be no power.
Say in the eastern, say Albert, in the eastern Pacific, there's a group of islands called the Marquis Islands, and there was a fellow there explaining how their forebears travel by canoe, and they use the stars so they could go in what we call an east-west pattern, or west-east, whichever way the wind was blowing, and get that direction. And then I think they had another system of stars for going north-south. How they went in a diagonal, I don't know. That wasn't clear. But they had a method of knowing that they weren't just going around aimlessly. They developed.
The ability to sail around the world, navigation is very, very, very interesting. Just by looking at the star, and for many of us looking at the star, it looks like a sky of random dots. Can't even recognize which is which. And with people who can notice the difference and do the sailing is just remarkable.
That is why those people on the catching the fish, they watch the morning star and then the evening star, and that is the way they have to go.
Yeah.
And from there, they're also looking on the polar system, that's on the north point, that's northern stars.
Yeah.
Or what's the western one. So, and by the way, that there is a race which is called Eskimo, and that is already living in the Siberia for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And then even the Maya people, and which they have a similar enclave on the wall, and similar to the ancient China Xia dynasty, and then some of Indian also have some belief, which is has some notes, similar literature notes and I think it's the Shang dynasty. They all connected to each other, and that's why the human are moving around.
Yeah.
And even you're saying that about the Polynesian. Yes, the Polynesians have moving up to the Formosa, and then Berlin, and even southern China area.
I'm just writing a bit of notes for future possible presentation. So Sam just remind me to talk about language.
Yes.
Do the
And-
language originate in Africa, and then we bring out the language, and then you eventually evolve into different language groups, or we develop them independently in different areas?
Yeah, that'll be an interesting.
Yeah, talking about
Absolutely, yeah.
the language itself, that's the Chinese language, which is combined. There's quite a lot of people, because I have a look at it. My ancestor actually is come from the Kansu area. And Kansu area, that is about the Xinjiang and mixed with a lot of Russian area parts. And our language is also for similar language, which in that area. And look at the Japanese language, which their language is combined of wing and hunting, and then what may be much easier is from the Fukienese the pronunciation, the Shanghai, the Changjiang areas, and then the Xinjiang area, the Chang'an area, and then they combine into the Japanese language. And in the Indonesia, that will become from the Sanskrit, Arab, Spanish. Yeah.
In terms of language grammars, we notice that there are a few family groups. So that would be interesting to look at the language grammars groups, etc., to find out how different languages. But one thing I'm quite sure is the written language should have developed quite independently, but the oral language is more interesting in terms of looking at the history.
And also genetics. Wouldn't we be able to use genetics to trace the origins of people?
Yes, actually they have done a number of work on that areas. Some work have been done tracing the mother using the smaller meat. What's that at the DNA called?
Mitochondria.
Yeah, using that to trace, because that is tracing the female, and they say they have 7 years, seven mothers outside of Africa. So all humans outside Africa comes from 3 mothers who left Africa at different times. That's another interesting. So it's not at the same time seven sisters left. They left at different times, and then eventually give rise of all the humans outside of Africa. So I think there's a book called that, 7
Eves.
7 Eves, yeah, something like that.
Anyway, interesting.
It's always fascinating to me just how many forebears we all have. Now, we think of ourselves, well, Albert, you think of yourself as Ip, Cyril, you think of yourself as Evans, and so it goes on. But look, think about it. 1 generation back, you've got 2 forebears. 2 generations is 4. 3 is 8. 4 is 16. 5 is 36. 6 generations is 64.
And so on.
Yeah, and within 10 generations, you're back to, or you're up to over 1 million. And 10 generations back, the population of the world was, well, for us from the from Europe and the Middle East, there was probably a population of less than 1 million. So everybody has to be related to everybody else from Europe and the Middle East. And the same would apply to Asia and to Africa.
Yeah, that's true. And just like the DNA tracing, we all come from 8 different sisters. Well, so we're related.
Brother and sister.
Yeah.
I thought with the Americas, humans moved in there much later than to, for instance, Australia, or, that's about the last place humans moved into.
Yeah.
Much later than the rest of the planet.
Because moving
Except
to
for New Zealand, of course.
Moving to America is very difficult. I'll put it that way.
Mm.
You either go through the Bering Strait, which is very, very cold, or sail through. Interesting. Why don't they? Now, there's another way of sailing through is sail through from the Atlantic. The Atlantic Ocean is much narrower than the Pacific. So why they don't sail through to Atlantic? That is another interesting question.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the monsoon.
Much later than anywhere else.
Yeah. And then they also, from the this extinction of the large mammals in America, it looks like they come through the Bering Strait, because there is almost a wiping out of large animals from north to south, moving that way.
I'm talking about comparatively recent times of only 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, but apparently the archaeologists have found fossils in Newfoundland, which they relate back to the Vikings from Denmark and Scandinavia. So, yeah. And there are many people who think that in recent times, again, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, the Chinese came to America by boat.
Yeah, but not 2,000 or 3,000 years. That's far too long. This is recent. You get into modern history with Vikings.
Yeah. So it will be earlier than that one, because the Mayans
800 to 1,200.
Yeah.
Albert.
Is he talking about
fair enough. I stand corrected.
Yeah.
That's in Europe 3,000 years ago.
The Peking's apes. That is how many? 30,000 years ago, or 50,000 years? Beijing Yan.
I don't know. The Beijing man is a Homo Erectus.
Yeah, it's near the Zhujiakou.
Yeah.
And
So
that's even up to now still have the preserved.
yeah, it's one of the oldest fossils found about Homo Erectus, the Beijing man.
And the second one, which is the Javanese one, which is like a...
The Javanese one is also another Homo Erectus.
Yeah, it's the Leon Bua, is it? Yeah.
So the Homo Erectus already reached, as the presentation video shows, to Indonesia, today's Indonesia. It's already there. So they have been traveled. Just remember, they are traveling on their own 2 feet. Nothing else. So it's remarkable how far they can travel.
So I think the Australian Aborigines, if you're going to be an anthropologist, this would be, or a paleontologist, this would be the continent that's got the most secrets to give up.
Yeah. Well, Australia is very interesting in other sense as well, because we have very strange animals as well.
Yeah. What about all that megafauna?
Yeah.
Which died out as humans are arriving, they're dying out. But of course, the continent is getting drier and drier and drier and still continues.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think Australia can put in more effort in studying this.
Yeah. It's so big and there's been so little study.
Yeah. And unfortunately, our higher education money is driving up because the Chinese are not coming.
And also because that will be within an arts degree.
Yeah.
It will now cost you far too much to do.
It will be very expensive as well.
Yeah. Be a luxury to do anthropology now.
Yeah. Okay, anyway. So on China today, we will be a musical presentation.
Oh, good.
Oh,
Yep.
Good.
yeah.
The China today, I'm going to show you a number of the flash mob during the Chinese National Day around China. So we will be listening to some Chinese songs. Flash mobs, that means people come up to a big area and then
To the rural side.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Good, Albert.
All right, look, thank you.
Good to hear that.
Okay,
you,
we'll
Albert,
see
and
you
I'll
around the
see you-
corner.
I'll see you in about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
same here.
Albert, I've let Betty know if anyone else rings up that they can use the old link.
Yeah,
To
they can use the
access
old link. Yeah.
I didn't realise that, and I don't think Susan realises it.
Send Susan an email and tell her.
Yeah, I told her, I rang her and told her that they
Yeah.
could use this link.
Yep.
Mm.
Okay. See you later.
Okay, see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. See you later.
Okay.
See you.
Bye.
Thanks, Albert.
Bye.